All right, how's everyone doing? All right, we're going to try to swing it while we try to find Dennis. Here's a couple of slides that I I think, sort of worked on this morning. You all have a handout that's in your registration packet, right? Maybe try to grab that out. All the data I was going to talk about is in that handout. And we have done a lot of data collection over the last, I would say, 6-7 years or so. Talking about, the main goal we are trying to, focus on is how we get that next 5 to 10 bushels in wheat, right? That's been the talk of today as well, right? Everyone's been talking about that, what we can do as part of that system, right? And I'm a systems agronomist. That's what I try to think about, There's no silver bullet. We cannot get a big yield bump, right? We have to make the system work for us in terms of how we combine these various aspects and chase that higher yield potential. Dennis did talk about the yield components, right? That's a really important one. We always try to compare ourselves with what else is out there, right? And some of those European numbers Dennis was talking about, they are way up there. So our goal is how we can get to those numbers, right? And those yield components that Dennis was talking about, the two big ones, right? One is number of grains per unit area, right? What's the second one? What's the second? The weight of that grain, right? It has to weight as well. So those are the two main yield components we are trying to chase. And how do we get there? We have to develop this sort of canopy that is maximizing the amount of sunlight that we are intercepting, right? I think about our plants as sort of these solar panels. They are going to give us interception of that sunlight, right? We are trying to intercept as much of the solar radiation as possible as early in the growing season as well, right? But the game doesn't end there, right? Because that's not what we are selling. We have to convert that sunlight into usable biomass, right? And the game doesn't end there as well either, right? Unless we are growing a forage crop. Because then we have to convert that biomass into the grain yield, right? So that's sort of what we focus on in our program, is how to develop this ideal canopy that can help us maximize that canopy development early in the growing season. We still don't have Dennis? Okay, all right. So again, you will see some of those bullet points later on, but if I were to ask you, what's your number one thing to maximize the yield potential, develop that canopy that can intercept as much sunlight early in the growing season for wheat? What is your answer? What's the number one thing you all think? Anyone? Canopy closure. Okay, that's a good one. How do we achieve canopy closure early in the season? How do we get there? Narrow rows. So row spacing is a component, and I will talk about that. There's a big drill sitting out there. I believe it's in 5-inch from Pottinger. So there are systems out there that we can take advantage of in terms of being able to benefit from a narrow row spacing. Does it improve yield? I'll show you some data, and your handout has some data on that. We have done a lot of work on corn and soybean side of things, right? On the corn side, 15 inches does help sometime, but the yield benefit is not as great. On soybean side, we have seen a consistent yield benefit anywhere from 5 to 10% going to narrow rows. How about winter wheat, right? There has not been enough research done on that aspect, and we have some data that shows that, yeah, there is a benefit of going to narrow rows. What else? What else are we thinking in terms of canopy closure? Kurt was talking about fertility, right? That's going to help for sure as well, right? Based on your soil type, based on other factors, putting the starter out might help with that. How about planting time? That's a big one, right? And I have some data that will show you that if we are not planting on time, you're losing that yield potential from get-go. So all these factors needs to be combined together. Thanks, Dennis. To sort of set up this potential, right? And this is sort of what I was already talking about. And let's get here. So planting time to me is very critical. What's a good time to start planting? That question is probably still out there. A good rule of thumb is these Haitian fly-free dates, right? It's sort of a misnomer. We really don't have this pest. I was talking to Chris DeFonso, our entomologist, and she told me that she has seen 2 Haitian flies over the last 30 years. Has anyone seen a Haitian fly in this room? Anyone? No. So it's not a pest that we are worried about right now, but they are starting to see some of it in Kentucky or even southern Ohio. Something for us to keep an eye on, but it's still a good rule of thumb in terms of when we start planting our wheat, right? And that's about mid of September around here in the thumb, as you can see here, right? All right, here's some data on planting time that we all have been talking about. This will put some numbers on what you're looking at, right? If you look at the x-axis, you can see we start planting in this trial, and we have done this over 3 years, right around that Haitian fly-free date in Lansing area. That's mid of September. And then we plant every 2 weeks or so, going into mid-November, right? So if you try to pass this data out, here's what it looks like. As long as we were able to plant in the month of September, so within 2 weeks of that fly-free date, we were within 90% of our yield potential. So we were losing some, but we were still doing okay, right? When we went into early October, now we are starting to lose more, right? But the overall loss was still less than 20%. And once we were beyond mid-October, now we are losing a lot of yield potential, right? More than 20%. And that does depend on the weather condition, right? You can see 1 year, 2020, where we did not lose much. But you are at the mercy of weather at that point, right? So again, this shows you the importance of timely planting. And we have done, I'll show you more data on seeding rate. We all have done that, right? We are delayed, we will bump our seeding rate. That does not minimize, or that does not take out the yield penalty that's coming from delayed planting. So something to keep in mind. Someone, I think, did ask me, is there a yield penalty or is there a yield benefit by planting before Haitian fly-free date? And we can come back to that, but yeah, I have seen some data showing that if you plant too early, you might end up putting out too many tillers, too much vegetative growth, and that might not improve your yield potential. It might cause some winter damage and might have some yield penalty as a result of that. And feel free to ask any questions as we go through some of these slides, right? This is sort of, again, the idea behind why we are getting a yield bump with early planting or a yield penalty with delay planting, right? I think Kurt was talking about this. When we are planting on time, we are getting a lot of those tillers early in the growing season that are going to be productive, will give us that seed head, include to that yield component, right? As we were delayed, you can see end of planting, end of October, early November, we were barely germinating, right? And that's where that canopy closure comes into play. Some of these late plantings is going to have a really delayed canopy closure. Less number of grain heads, lower yield components, lower yield overall, right? All right, let's look at the seeding rate piece here. Let's start by maybe in the room, what's your typical seeding rate for wheat? Anyone wants to shout out a number? What are you seeding at? Okay, how about, that will be about 1.5 million, Dennis? 3 bushels, how much would that be in terms of number of seeds?
Depends on seed.
Yeah, and that's a good point, and I was going to say that, again, one thing we recommend is go with number of seeds, right? Know your seed weight and do the conversions, right? Because otherwise, the test weight of the variety, the actual seed weight of the variety is going to play a big role. But I assume, and anyone else in terms of how many millions of seeds you are seeding? The number I have heard before is around 1.5 million or so. And you can see a lot of numbers over here. It's going to depend on your planting time, right? We have done a lot of work over the last 3-4 years on this aspect. And you can see some of these response curves. So my x-axis is my seeding rate. And you can see these different colors or different planting times. As I'm planting late in the season, that's where the curve starts bending upwards. For timely planting, if you look at the blue line, the curve is very flat. So we can cut down our seeding rate without causing any yield penalty. And that's what Dennis was talking about. Out there in Europe, they are much lower compared to us. How low do we want to be? Again, that's going to come back to your specific farm, right? So what we would recommend is look at some of these numbers you see over here. Cut your seeding rate by 20%, 25% or so, right? And see what that does. Throw a test strip out there and see what that does to, based on your farm, based on your soil, based on your weather conditions. But for timely planting, there is a potential to cut down our seeding rate. That's one of the main take-homes we were able to get out of these data. All right. So again, I think this topic has been brought up before, planting methods, right? Someone had a question about what they're doing out in Europe. And pretty much I believe everyone is still dealing with this non-ideal seed placement in wheat, unlike what we do for corn and beans, right? One of my grad students made this cartoon, which I thought is pretty cool. It shows you, what the ideal seed placement or non-ideal placement looks like, right? Here, we are dealing with a lot of variable planting depth, you can see, right? And then a lot of skips as well as doubles, right? Compared to this is sort of what we want the seed placement to look like, right? And we are able to achieve this for corn and beans, right? Are we there yet for wheat? No, right? The technology we are still using is what we call this controlled spill type drill mechanisms, right? Where again, we are able to meter out seed, but it's not as precise. And probably one of the reasons why we stay with our higher seeding rate as well, right? So we have been doing a lot of work looking at this precise seed placement piece here, right? Using a precision planting system that can do a good job with seeding depth as well as a good singulation. Yeah. And then we were also hearing some reports about some folks who are going out there broadcasting their seed and incorporating. So this is different than using an airplane to fly in your seed, because that's just broadcasting, right? Here, we are using a shallow tillage tool to incorporate that seed after broadcasting. And again, we just wanted to know what that system is doing in terms of seed placement and impacts on yield. All right, so again, here is some of the equipment that we have used. These were all on-farm trials. Some of you in the room here did participate in this. And you can see, again, a typical drill. And then the planter we were using, we were able to go to narrow rows with that, right? That topic did come up earlier. So we were able to plant in 5-inch row spacing using that planting system. And down at the bottom, you can see various equipments that we were able to use. And the important piece here is uniform distribution of seed. If we don't do a good job distributing that seed, we will end up hurting ourselves and then incorporating that seed. And here's a couple of pictures on what we were achieving. So you can see both in 7.5 and 5 inches, we can see those row spacings, right? When we did broadcast, we did not have any row spacing. So lack of that row spacing pattern here. But how did we do? So again, here is a couple of pictures that's showing the comparison between when we use a drill versus a planter. And we were able to, again, maintain a better seeding depth. And that gave us more uniformity of these plants as well as tillers. And that has been discussed before, right? And we did gain from it. We were able to actually get a better fungicide efficacy from the plots where we were using a planter, okay? And that did cut down our dawn level. I think out of 4 or 5 site years, we only had 1 year where we had a high worm levels. And we did help by going to this precision system. But we did not really achieve a good singulation. And that's probably because of that relatively high seeding rate we typically plant at. And here is a quick cartoon that sort of shows you what we were achieving, right? In drill, as you all expect, we were getting close to an 1.5 inches, but there was variability. With the broadcasting, it was all over the place. And with precision system, we were spot on. So this did benefit us. And we were thinking with this broadcast, we are going to get a big yield penalty, right? Here is yield data. Again, a lot of data here. This is part of your handout as well. We did this trial over 3 years, total of 17 farms. The first point I want to make here is this comparison of drill versus broadcast. We did not see a yield penalty at any of our 17 site years. So that was a surprise to us. Again, this is something we do not recommend, but if you are in a bind, if you're looking for a system to get that wheat in ground on time, on a short-term basis, I believe that does work out. But look at the top bullet. When we used that precision system, we were able to improve our yield, anywhere from 8 to 30% or so at more than half of our locations. And those are these gray bars at some of these farms. So across most of our locations, we were able to benefit by going to that precision planting system. And I believe this is mostly coming from the narrow row system, narrow row spacing piece, 5 inches compared to the 7.5-inch spacing we had in the seed drill. And this figure sort of shows that nicely, right? You can see the row spacing on x-axis, and as we are going to that narrow row spacing, the yield is increasing, right? And this data, people in other places, this is some literature data on your right that's showing out in Europe, people have done some of this work and have seen similar responses, that there is a benefit of going to narrow row spacing. And it comes back to this canopy closure we were talking about, right? These pictures were taken on early May, and you can see in 7.5, 10, and 15 inches. We were not closing canopy, anywhere from 70 to 80% canopy closure. But look at 5 inches. And we were more than 90% closed. So that's showing you the potential of narrow rows on top of all the other management pieces, right? To maximize that canopy closure and give you a yield bump. And sort of again, I think we have touched on this. Where is this coming, right? Seed drill, you can see we are doing some, again, metering, but we have doubles, we have skips, and there's barely any space between these seeds. This is around 1.2 million seeding rate or so. When we went to a precision system, we are able to maintain more seed spacing, and there's more space between those seeds, right? And that looks sort of, more like what an ideal spacing might look like. And that broadcast idea, this is sort of where that comes in. That if we do a good job distributing that seed, we might be able to achieve good yield potential. But this narrow precision system is where we believe that next 5 to 10 bushel yield benefit can potentially come from. And we are spending a lot of our ongoing research, a lot of our time looking at this piece, as a system, how we can combine this narrow row spacing with other pieces to achieve that next 5 to 10 bushel yield benefit, right? And that's where this canopy cover idea comes into play. Eric, I assume, will talk a little bit about this as well. We have been looking into this. There's a lot of research on the corn side of things. If you remember corn hybrids from 30, 40 years ago, they used to have more of these droopy leaf types, floppy leaf types. And now we have more of these erect leaves. Do we have something similar on the wheat side, and can we benefit from that trait, right? That's what we are looking into. Here you can see 2 wheat canopies. The one on the left has more of that wider tiller angle at the bottom, if you look towards the bottom, compared to this canopy, which is more of an erect type canopy, right? So this is what we are looking into, is can we combine this trait with some of the other management in order to achieve that extra yield bump. There's a lot of work done in Australia on this aspect, and they have really benefited from some of these erect leaf canopies, the varieties that have that sort of a trait. So that's sort of what we are looking at. We have done a lot of data on this piece. This tiller angle, we have shown a lot of variability. So at the bottom of the plant, how does that variety look like? And you can see anywhere from 25 degrees to about 10 to 12 degrees or so. So there's a lot of variability in this trait that someone like Eric can exploit in terms of breeding for the new varieties, right? What else we can do here is what we are looking into. Couple of ideas that we had been chasing in a high yield environment. We all look into that piece, right? High input conditions. We are thinking, again, early planting, narrow rows, relatively high seeding rates. These are the sort of conditions where we probably are developing that nice canopy, right? And our bottom of the canopy might be getting shaded out. And that's no good, right? That canopy is not getting any light. So in those conditions, some of these erect canopies might give us a yield benefit. And we have some data to show that. On the other side, if we are dealing with some of these lower yield environments, where we are not closing canopy, delay planting, wide row spacing, and things like that, that's where some of these droopy, floppy types can help us close the canopy early in the growing season. So we are not losing that interception of sunlight, right? And there are consequences on weed control, there are consequences on moisture conservation, things like that by use of these canopies as well. The other piece here we are looking into, again, coming back to the narrow row side, is how we can combine, again, narrow rows with some of these canopy types. And here's a picture of planter that we were able to build last year. It's about 150K or so, and here you can see our row units are spaced 10 inches apart, but we have two gangs of them. So we are able to plant in 5-inch row spacing in one pass. So this year we have used this system along with these canopy types that I've been talking about. The idea is that in these narrow rows, right, can we benefit from these erect canopies more? Because they are going to let the sunlight go towards the bottom of that canopy. And that probably is a beneficial trait that we might be able to achieve. I have a talk with some of growers who have used these 15-inch rows, right? That's where we are not intercepting enough light. And that's where using some of these droopy, floppy varieties can benefit us. So we have these trials in ground this year, and we'll share this data as we move towards the next growing season. So again, a lot of ideas here. The two main things is timely planting. We are seeing year after year, that's very critical piece. Last year was a challenge to get that in ground on time, right? We are working with Christy Sprague's group to look on the soybean side of things, can we use desiccants to senesce that canopy? And some of you might be using those products on dry beans. Is there a potential to use them on the soybean side to get soybeans harvested early so we can plant wheat on time to maintain that high yield potential, right? There is again a potential for reduction in seeding rate for timely planting. Under delayed planting conditions, we do benefit, increasing our seeding rate. But on timely planting conditions, there is a benefit, right, to cut down that seeding rate. Narrow spacing, again, we are seeing year after year in small plot work with our on-farm trials that there is a benefit to go to those narrow rows. Does singulation of seed help? We still don't know the answer. So I believe most of the benefit is coming from going to narrow rows, closing that canopy early in the growing season. And then the last bit is, again, matching this canopy type. If we're going to narrow rows, I think there's a more potential for yield improvement using some of these erect canopy types, right? And that's where what that investment is looking like. If you're thinking about replacing your planting system, what that next system is looking like. And that needs to be a multi-crop as well, right? We are looking on the soybean side to see the potential to go into 15 or even 10-inch rows. We have even done some trials this year going into 5-inch row spacing. So we can think about a long-term investment that can not only benefit wheat, but some other crops in that cropping system as well. And that's where I will stop and see if there are any questions.
Two questions.
All right. Yes, sir.
So with all these systems, have you did any work on the falling numbers on narrow row?
Okay, so the question is, within all the systems, have we looked at the falling number piece? So that's going into the crop quality piece, right? We have not directly looked at the falling number. It's so weather dependent. A lot of the work we have done, we do look at the quality piece, but we have not seen low numbers in a lot of our trials. What we have done, though, is looking at the worm level, right? So looking at the head scare piece and see if there's any impact from going to these different systems by cutting down that worm level. And that's what we have seen, that when we have used our precision systems, we are achieving more of that seeding depth. That's giving us more uniform tillering, more uniform flowering for your fungicide application, and that has given us benefit in terms of cutting down the worm level. And we have also looked at the protein level, but again, protein does not relate to the falling numbers as well. So there are some quality pieces, and there was talk about that as well, right? How do we maintain the quality? Because a lot of our wheat goes into milling. So there are benefits of going into this system on the quality piece on top of the yield piece as well.
So last year, the ones that planted early, they had more falling number issues than what was planted later.
Okay, so the comment is that last year the wheat that was planted early, you had issues with the falling numbers with that. That's a good comment. Has anyone else seen that issue, that if you're planting wheat early, you have issues with the falling numbers? And that again, we probably need to look into that. What we are looking into is, again, what happens when we plant before the fly-free date. And this could be a potential issue there as well on the quality side of things. So that's a very good comment, and we will look into that and see if it's a consistent issue, or it might be a weather pattern, right? That you planted early, you just happen to be in that window when the harvesting came around, that your early planting wheat was more susceptible to issues that will lead to falling number. So it's a weather, potentially a random weather event. Is it consistent? That's a good point, and we will look into that. And that again could be an issue with the too early of a planting. If we go earlier than the Haitian fly-free date, that probably can become an issue as well. All right.
One more question back in the corner.
Yes.
You looked at 5-inch spacing with a monocell. Have you looked at 6-inch drill versus a 7.5-inch drill?
6-inch drill versus 7.5. So we have looked at 7.5-inch drill versus 5-inch drill. The unit that's sitting outside, that's in 5-inch row spacing, and that's a drill.
Why haven't you looked at 6-inch drill?
We do these trials every year. So any unit we can get our hands on, we are more than happy to look that up. So if we have a commercially available 6-inch row unit, we will be more than happy to look at that.
6-inch drill that I plant my wheat with.
Okay. So again, I think that's a very good comment. I believe, again, the figure I was showing you, there is the data that we have collected, that other places have done, are showing the benefit of going to narrow rows, right? Where do you start seeing the benefit? We have seen it at 5 inches. My gut feeling is that probably at 6 inches, you probably will see some benefit. So yeah, I think that's a good comment, and we can try to look into that. But I would think that, yeah, that there potentially would be a benefit going narrower than 7.5, and that will include a 6-inch row spacing as well. And I think Dennis was talking about this. Out in Europe, a lot of their drills are at 4.8 or 5-inch row spacing, right? 10 centimeters would be 4.8 inches. So I don't think there's a number that we have to target. The main goal is to start going into a narrow row spacing as we are thinking about the future of wheat production. All right, thank you.
Okay. All right.